Hi guys, welcome back to the Balaclava broadcast. Today's session was going to be a fissionary, following on from the Ductionary. However, I got really into finding out about one of the fish, so today's session is all about zebrafish. Welcome to Zebrafishionary. So, over the course of today's podcast, you will find out, as I did myself, that actually humans and zebrafish have a lot in common. So yeah, and then I got a little bit into a study where they gave this tiny little zebrafish psychedelics, and it had some interesting outcomes. It's also become a symbol for exploring ancient neural pathways, but we'll get into that in a little bit because it does get quite heavy. So here's some interesting facts about zebrafish. Anyway, so genetic similarity. So zebrafish actually have about 70% of human genes, and around 84% of their genes that are linked. Well, 84% of human genes that are. Oh my god. 84% of genes linked to human disease also exist in zebrafish. So they're incredibly useful for studying genetic diseases, drug responses, brain function, things like that. So throughout this, you're going to hear me use a word called conserved, and basically, when scientists say that a process is conserved, it means that a stretch of DNA, RNA, or the protein has stayed almost identical across different species for millions of years, and because it's so vital, evolution will never ever change it. So the things that we have conserved with zebrafish is heart development, nervous system formation, limb and fin patterning, all conserved between humans and zebrafish. Zebrafish embryos are also transparent, so scientists can literally watch the development happen in real time, so it's really helpful. Organ systems. So although their organs aren't 100% identical to ours, are this thing called analogous, which means they perform the same job. So you think about a bird's wing and a butterfly's wing. They both fly, they're built differently, but they have the same purpose. So zebrafish have a heart with similar cell types and pumping rhythms, kidneys that filter waste the same way that ours do, and a liver that detoxifies. I mean, it'll be super interesting to see if they're used for any sort of like ketamine research or anything like that, or alcoholism research. And they're not being used for that yet so far. But yeah, interesting. They do also, and this is the most important part of the podcast to link everything in, so they have a brain that uses the same neurotransmitters and circuits as humans, including serotonin. And yeah, that's the most important link for today's episode. So all about the study. So in 2024, Doton Braun and his team developed a high resolution behavioral tracking system to see how psilocybin affects larval zebrafish. So they studied the fish's behavior prior, and then obviously after, once they gave them the psilocybin. And then they also used psilocybin blockers to make sure that it was the drug that was causing this kind of behavior. So the fish were given doses of psilocybin, and then they put them in stressful situations like a predator cue or a sudden environmental change. And then using AI-based tracking, the scientists monitored how their swimming patterns changed. And what they saw was fascinating. So under normal stress, fish will dart erratically or freeze, but when they gave them the psilocybin and they were put in a stressful situation, they swam more calmly, they explored more confidently, their movement patterns were smoother and more stable, and they just seemed less anxious and more resilient. And this mirrors what happens across all mammals of psilocybin. So they typically have increased exploration, decreased avoidance, and a general sense of emotional loosening. Which is all great and interesting, but how do we know that psilocybin actually caused this effect? So we know that psilocybin caused this effect because we have this ancient receptor called 5-HT2A. For the purpose of this podcast, I'm going to call it 5. Everybody get down. Right, I'm going to call it 5H because otherwise it's too much of a mouthful. So the researchers looked at this receptor, and this is the main receptor that serotonin binds to. It's the main serotonin receptor that psychedelics bind to. So the 5-HT2A receptor is a natural part of your brain's serotonin system, and it's activated all the time. Psychedelics, however, just supercharge it, or they disrupt it in very particular ways. REM related signaling also uses this receptor, so it's tied to sleep, dreaming. So when psychedelics enter the picture, they bind to the same receptor, but they activate it differently. So it's either an atypical signal or it's just exaggerated. They kind of supercharge it. Psychedelics don't just turn the receptor on, they just change how it signals, and they cause biased signaling. So it activates certain intracellular pathways more than serotonin usually would. This distorts the flow of information through cortical circuits, leading to sensory blending, symphonesia, altered time perception, and ego dissolution. So, how did they know that the 5-HTA thingy was activated by the psilocybin? So, scientists use drugs that block the 5-HTA, and one of these is called ketanserin. And once they gave them this, the effects of the psilocybin, so the calmness, the exploration of the tank, it all disappeared. They did gene mapping, which confirmed zebrafish have the genes for this receptor, so it's present, it exists, it's possible to activate it using psilocybin. They also use brain imaging, so activity in the dorsal raphe nucleus, the serotonin control center, changed exactly as expected when the receptor was activated. So the evidence points strongly to psilocybin working through the same receptor system in both humans and zebrafish. And then when I was Googling all of this, it was saying how the 5-HT2A receptor is basically ancient and it's far older than human consciousness, blah, 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 blah. So I was like, how the hell do they know that this thing existed prior to human consciousness? So this is where it gets really interesting. So this is how they basically know that this 5-HT2A receptor predates consciousness. So there is molecular evolution evidence. So the 5-HT2A receptor is part of a family called G protein coupled receptors. This is all very sciencey, but it will make sense. And these are some of the oldest signaling molecules in animal evolution. Oh my god, my words. So scientists have sequenced the genomes of hundreds of species from humans to jellyfish and found serotonin receptor genes, 5-HT-like genes, in primitive organisms that don't even yet have complex nervous systems. So this is like some of the comparisons. Oh lord, these words. So cnidarians, like jellyfish and sea anemones, have serotonin receptors similar to early 5-HT types. Insects and mollusks have clear 5-HT2 type receptor homologs. And vertebrates, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, all these ancient animals carry versions of 5-HT2A, and they have conserved sequences, so the DNA code has not changed much across 500 million years. So basically this 5-HT2A 5-HT receptor is found in primitive organisms that are far older than the human brain, the neocortex, or even anything resembling a conscious thought before they had a sense of self, and things that maybe would not even have a sense of self. Like sea anemones, they're basically a rock with a bit of jelly flesh inside it, and they have breathing parts, but they have this serotonin receptor. So number 2, phylogenetic dating. So using molecular clocks, a way of estimating when genes evolved based on mutation rates, researchers trace the origin of the serotonin receptor family to around 700-900 million years ago. And at that time, life consisted of simple multicellular animals, so 1D animals, long before vertebrates or any known form of consciousness. So actually the 5-HT2A subtype itself seems to have diverged around 450 to 500 million years ago, around the time that early fish appeared. And I've got some references. I've got Nicholas D.E. Psychedelics, Pharmacological Reviews 2016, and Perotka and Howell 1994, Evolution of the Serotonin Receptor Family, if anyone wants to check my facts, bitch. It wasn't until the 1980s actually that we discovered that 5-HT2A is the kind of main psychedelic receptor. So when researchers say that psychedelics target an ancient receptor that predates consciousness, this is what they mean. These substances are activating a biological communication system so old that it evolved long before any creature was capable of knowing what it was experiencing. So that's what makes the zebrafish study so interesting, basically. So even without the human-like brain, they still respond to the psilocybin, they still have the receptors, and they still experience it the same way. They swim more boldly, they resist stress, but their brain is completely different to our brain, but it still impacts them the same way. So if the 5-HT2A receptor evolved long before complex 4, then psychedelics could possibly be tapping into ancient neural circuits, ones that existed long before consciousness itself, which is super interesting. So, in other words, and I've done so much research into psychedelics. We could do about 10 podcasts on that. Not taking them. I mean, I have taken them a couple of times, but I researched them for like 4 or 5 years before I ever even touched one. Because I'm really into ancient civilizations, and they're very big on you use them as a tool. You don't just take them for fun, they're there to teach us something. And this all kind of ties in together. So research on psychedelics and ancient civilizations already tell us that psychedelics do not create new experiences, they amplify current experiences. And again, tying into this, they amplify ancient biological systems that regulate how living things respond to the world. So for zebrafish, that meant less freezing and more exploration, but for humans, that might mean more openness, emotional release, or mystical insight. Or it's the same receptor, it's just different levels of consciousness, and it's the same underlying biology. And it's just interesting because if you think about how we experience psychedelics compared to a zebrafish, interpreted a different way, but it might be completely different levels of experience. I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but me and Andy, me and someone had a very interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago where we were discussing this, and we were saying, the joy that you feel, everyone experiences joy the same, and the way that a daisy or an ant might experience joy, they feel it the same, but it's just not amplified as much as it is for humans because we're bigger and we have so many more circuits and blah blah blah. But all in all, it's the same kind of thing. I don't know if that makes sense or if this even ties in. I don't know if I'm explaining it really well. I might bring him into the conversation at some point, but we'll see. So then, right, should we pause there? We're going to take a little pause. So, some neuroscientists take this even further, and they think that psychedelics basically act like a reset button for the brain and maybe for evolution. So, in rats, psilocybin boosts activity in the brain areas, but it's also active during the REM sleep, during the sleep phase. So, it's like the brain, while we're on psychedelics, it's revisiting, reorganizing emotional memories, a waking dream state. Since serotonin is one of the oldest neurotransmitters in evolution, psychedelics, its most potent modifier, might act as a kind of biochemical meta-language that nature uses to help organisms adapt. So again, this is where I think it's super interesting. So a tiny little molecule that connects fungi, fish, humans, we each respond different, but we're echoing the same biological rhythm, adaptation, renewal, and experience. So, on a lighter note, here's why zebrafish aren't just fascinating, but they're also changing medicine. So in the UK, Edinburgh Cancer Research Centre is using zebrafish to develop new melanoma drugs. So the Ewan MacDonald Centre studies motor neuron regeneration for MND, and King's College London uses zebrafish to model neurodevelopment disorders and depression. The Royal Veterinary College investigates rare childhood diseases like Batten disease, and they test therapies safely in fish before humans. And I just think that's incredible. These tiny fish are having real world implications on our medicine and things, which is amazing. And they're literally tiny. They are actually using, I did come across a study, and I wasn't sure whether I was going to touch on it or not, but they are actually using zebrafish for autism research. So again, because we share so many like our brains operate the same way as zebrafish also have quite similar like social activities to us. They live in swarms and shoals or whatever. So they basically they manipulated the genes of some zebrafish to give them something that would imitate autism basically, and then watched how it affected them, the other groups, things like that. I don't really want to touch on that study because it kind of makes me uncomfortable, so I'm going to do some more research into that before I properly do a podcast on that. But let me know if you are interested in it, and I'm sure there's wider interest, but I'm just not sure how I feel about gene editing in humans or fish really. So we'll leave that one there, but you can Google it if you want. Zebrafish autism research study. So from transparent embryos to stress-resilient fish, the zebrafish really does show us something profound, that the boundary between humans and other animals is thinner than we think. Consciousness is described as the felt experience of being alive, not just processing information, but feeling it. So maybe this research shows that it could be the latest expression of ancient memory written into life itself, and psychedelics just awaken that memory, reminding the brain how to be flexible, curious, and alive. It's fascinating that the 5-HT2A receptor has survived hundreds of millions of years of evolution, and whatever role it played was so important that the body has kept it generation after generation, which I think is really interesting, and I might do a whole other podcast into that. So obviously the body feels, I mean, obviously serotonin is super important, but they obviously feel, the body somewhat feels that psychedelics are really important. Take that, war on drugs. And now, I wasn't going to continue this, but I will continue to do it. Here's some random zebrafish facts to end on a light, positive note. If you're interested, if you're burnt out, just switch this off. So Casper, the transparent zebrafish, he is a genetically engineered zebrafish created by researchers at Harvard and Boston's Children's Hospital in 2008. He is completely transparent. Scientists removed pigmentation genes so they could literally watch organs and cancer cells grow inside a living organism in real time. No surgery or dissection needed. So he revolutionized live imaging and cancer research, and he's used in thousands of studies worldwide, including stem cell tracking and drug testing. I don't think actual Casper is used in thousands of studies, just they replica him. And do you know what? Casper was actually the name of my first invisible friend when I was younger, and then my sister had her invisible friend kill my invisible friend, and I cried for a while. I'm not sure why I actually cried, because I'm pretty sure I just called him Casper because I'd watched Casper the Ghost, so I think I just invented a friend and just called him Casper based off that. But anyway, Nemo, the learning zebrafish. So this is not the Pixar Nemo. This was given by researchers in a University of Queensland study, 2017, that explored zebrafish learning and memory. So Nemo and his schoolmates, they learned to associate specific visual patterns with food rewards, helping scientists map how fish brains form memories and make decisions. And it helped bridge the gap between fish cognition and mammalian learning systems, showing that even zebrafish can demonstrate forms of anticipation and pattern recognition. I mean, this is a whole anticipation and pattern recognition. Again, I might do another podcast on this, because I listened to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and it genuinely gave me like an existential crisis. I'll try and remember the name of it or link it, but it was really interesting, and it was basically saying they'd studied the body, and before you've even had a thought, your brain has sent communications to your body to do something. And it was basically going into, like, we all think we have this sense of self and this personality, but do we really? Or is our brain just sending signals and our body is following, and then the thoughts come afterwards? I might link it, I might not, because it really does mess with your head, but it's a super interesting research podcast, whatever you want to call it. And that kind of ties into that about anticipation, pattern recognition, and actually our body responds before we think, kind of. Okay, the psilocybin fish study, that was this study, sorry. Glowfish. So in 2003, glowfish became the first genetically modified animal ever sold as a part. Again, don't really like it. So they genetically modified this zebrafish using jellyfish and coral genes, and then it glows bright neon colours, basically. But again, I don't like it. Sold as fish, glowfish that glow in the dark, but it's just basically bioengineering, and a scientist that got too happy with whatever he had in his hands. Anyway, thank you so much for joining my podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next Monday for the next one. And hopefully next one will be less sciencey, because I can't pronounce them all, and I also don't like editing. So I hope if you made it all the way through, thank you very much for listening. Appreciate it. Bye.